The cloud. Hello. Ah, but this doesn't work. This probably only works if you turn this volume up.
Is this the new gong?
This is the new gong. Office hours! Office hours! All right. We got that office hours. Okay.
What you know about office hours?
All right. Cool. So I got one question, but I think the person who asked it isn't necessarily here, so put it at the bottom. Any other questions for today's office hours?
Since we're already having a party.
Yeah.
Party with ES.
Yeah. Okay, so we just want like a ES 2017. Okay.
I had a question about bash expansions.
Okay.
And also, I'm wondering if you might be able to quickly go through your config files, not necessarily the Git ones, but your bash profile and RC. Just kind of like real quick those things do.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
I had a question about using beforeEach and afterEach.
In Mocha? Okay, Mocha before and after each. Okay. Anybody else? No?
Oh,
What is it?
no syntax. Syntax, what we were talking about.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
I mean, I think you may have talked about it.
Okay. How about require node file in the node REPL? Something like that? Okay, cool. All right. Yes.
Can we do reduce?
Sure. Okay. All right. So we got a bunch of stuff. So what specifically would you like to know about ES 2017?
Well, about the node.green file in the curriculum, I just don't understand.
Okay. Well, let's look at it.
Thank you.
So the question was just about, in general, this module, the party like it's ES 2017 module. What question? Do you have any specific questions?
Like with the read and then the node.green file, just what is that in reference to?
Oh, this thing?
Yes.
This thing shows you the different. Okay, so here's the deal, right? So JavaScript was created a long time ago and implemented in Firefox. It was probably actually pre-Firefox. It was whatever Mozilla's browser was before that. Forgive me if this history is incorrect. This is how I remember it. And then Microsoft was like, we should totally add this whole scripting thing to the web. So they copied JavaScript and they implemented it themselves. And when they did that, there were like slight differences, right? And so we ended up being locked into the exact same version and feature set of JavaScript for years and years. And it took a huge amount of effort for any new features to be added, right? So in the last, like, I don't know, 7 years or so, folks have tried, like, there's been an effort to try to speed that up, right? So what's happening is there's a who are in charge of deciding like which features get in and which don't, and they have all these specifications for all these different features, and this website lists all those different features and which little parts of them work in what environments. I think this page might actually just be for Node. So which versions of Node support which features of new JavaScript features. Now, there's also this thing called Babel, which is a transpiling library, which lets you write JavaScript with these new features. And then they wrote a bunch of code that says, when I encounter these new features, I'm going to actually turn that into JavaScript that does the same thing using old features, right? So they down compile to 2015, or ES5 is really the, ES5 is the one we were on for like decades, right? So maybe not decades, but around a decade. And so you will find that they have started, instead of saying, okay, here's Babel and it supports these 20 features, and then in this other module we support these other 11 features, they just bundled those together in like ES 2015, ES 2016, and 2017. And so that's the way Babel's managing it. Node is pulling in these features in a totally different schedule, right? Babel supports import and export. Node does not. Browsers do not, right? So this was linked in that file to let you know if you want to use like you know, array deconstruction. Which versions of Node support that out of the box? And if it doesn't, right, I don't know if there's anything on this list, right? So if we wanted to use, I don't know what any of these are, the rest spread properties, right? So like we might have to use transpiling to use that syntax so that it gets turned into code that actually works, right? Now this is going to be different from like, is this supported in Chrome or Internet Explorer? Like which browsers support these? Like arrow functions. Which browsers support arrow functions? This page won't tell you that, but, and I probably should link to this. I think you can go to caniuse.com and look for arrow functions, right? And look, Edge, which is the new IE, Firefox, Chrome, almost everybody you care about supports this feature. So you may not even have to transpile at this time in JavaScript web development, right? Because browsers support this. So those are two places that you can go to figure out like which features are supported and which ones aren't. Is that all you wanted to know?
Yeah, and I guess should we incorporate Babel as you can fit in all of our?
Isn't it Babel, Tower of Babel? I always say Babel. I don't know why. I'm sorry.
In all of our projects.
What's that?
Doesn't say like query.
What's wrong with query? Isn't it query? Query? Yeah, okay. All right. Pronunciation 101 by Michael Klein. Okay. So yes, you do not need to, like most of the features that we care about, especially in phase 1 and 2 with the newer versions of JavaScript, like let, const, arrow functions. No, requires not a thing. Let, const, arrow functions. I'm trying to think if there's like anything else that No, that's all been around for ages. I think that's it that I can think of off the top of my head. That's all working in the latest version of Node and most of the browsers you care about. So we don't need to do any transpiling. At some point, we'll probably want to do some transpiling because we're going to, in the future, probably around phase 3 time, there'll be a lot of transpiling going on because not only do we want to make sure our code is as most compatible as possible, right? If we can turn all of our arrow functions into old school JavaScript functions that do the right binding, then that's going to work on older versions of IE or something. So it's going to be a bit more compatible. So why not do it? Because at the same time, we're also bundling we're bundling 50 different scripts down into one, and we're doing all this compilation anyway. So we might as well do some Babel transpiling. But we don't need to worry about that for a while. Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you there's like about a 2 to 2 second delay.
I can't do anything about that. Yeah.
No, I know. I just
Oh,
wanted
okay.
to let you know.
Cool. Thanks.
So when you move the screen around.
Okay. Like the audio and the screen aren't in sync, you mean?
Well,
Like-
as long as you're not doing anything while you're talking.
Oh, weird. Okay, cool. All right, any other questions about the state of JavaScript features? Cool. Yeah, this whole module, the whole point is just so that you're aware that there's this like weird part of JavaScript where we have all these new features that are and are not implemented in some subset and are in some of them are still undecided and not committed to, and some like they're experimental and some of them are no longer experimental. Arrow functions are pretty solid, things like that. So you just want to be aware of this stuff. Cool. All right, so next thing, bash brace expansion. All this means, so bash has certain special characters that get changed into things, right? So the tilde, for example, this doesn't actually get sent to echo. It gets changed to whatever your home directory is, right? So I can illustrate this by making my own echo script in JavaScript that just does a console log of process.argv slice2. So now I can say hello from the console, right? And it's going to give me back an array representing the arguments that came in to that, to the function that I wrote, right? Makes sense, right? So if I say node echo whatever tilde hello, right? It gets changed, right? This is almost like an alias to my home directory, right? There's other things too, right? I can say node echo.js. Let's say I wanted 5 files. So file 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.js, right? So that's how that curly brace expansion works, is it'll take whatever this string is and make this many of those strings, putting each one of these members of our array here in that place, right? So I use this as a shortcut sometimes where, let's say I wanted to move the echo file to echo-foo, right? Let's say I wanted to do that. Here's the move command I could write for that, right? I could also say move echo.js and then like curly brace dash foo, right? And so this is going to expand out to echo nothing, right? There's nothing here, .js, and then echo-foo. So if I just pass this to echo, you'll see that that's what it expands out to. So sometimes, and this is super tricky, and you don't need to necessarily even do this, sometimes I'll just do this as shorthand because I don't want to type out echo.js space echo-foo.js, right? But this is like not an important optimization for you to be aware of, but that's what I use expansion for. Also, sometimes, let's say I wanted to make 3 files all named the same thing, but with a different extension. So let's say I'm making a new website. I'll often say touch index.html, CSS, and JavaScript, right? And now I've got all 3 of those files because Bash expands this out into these 3 things. If you want to test Bash expansion, just pass it to echo and it'll tell you what inputs it got back, right? Not a feature you totally need to know about, not a crucial feature in Bash. It's just a useful way of doing some shorthand commands. And there's a bunch of other ones in there that I don't know about and don't use. Bash has a bunch of special syntax that lets you do all kinds of stuff like this. And this is one I use once a week or something, right? Cool? All right. Going through my dot files. Watch me change all my API keys again. All right. So this is so the way I have this set up is I have a dot files directory that's literally called dot files. So this is a directory that I'm in, and it's a Git repository. And oh, sure, yeah. Okay, let's do that. All right, so these are some example dot files I provided for folks. Bashrc is going to be run for every single shell every new bash instance that you start is going to run this file. So let's look at that file. So every single bash file that I run, or a bash session that I start, is going to tell it that the environment variable editor should be Atom. And this is a --wait flag. And we can go into that more. It's also going to say my Git editor is Atom. It's going to add the local directory node modules bin to the beginning of my path, which is going to make the commands that I install for a local Git node project executable without having to say /node modules.bin/mocha or whatever, right? Yeah? Feel free to interrupt me with questions. This sets nodem so that any node application that I run that pays attention to this environment variable will know that if you're running anything on this computer, it's probably in development unless I've overwritten that in like a .m file or something like that. Cool. This is setting up NVM, the Node Version Manager. So if you have that installed and you're running multiple versions of Node, you want this. If not, just comment it out. Yeah. This just sets an environment variable and then it sources a file telling NVM, like, NVM is basically configuring our shell however it wants if we do this. Yes.
Does NVM automatically come with NPM, or is that something separate that you have to download?
No, NPM is part of Node. So if I install a version of Node, it comes with the Node executable and the NPM executable. Node Version Manager installs multiple versions of Node. Therefore, multiple versions of Node and NPM, right? And it manages which one you have access to at any given time, right?
Is it a package?
What?
Is it a NPM package?
I think NVM is brew installed, but I could be wrong. This could be accomplished with a node package, but it would be a little chicken eggy because you'd install a node package and then switch to a different version of node and no longer have that node package. It'd be weird. It's got to be brew install. Yeah. This is something I use if you have the hub command installed, which wraps around the get command and gives it GitHub features. You can Google that. This is just aliasing PB copy and PB paste to copy and paste. And these are a couple of helpful shortcut aliases that I have that are optional. Yeah. So a little bit of setup, just configuring our shell a little bit here. Cool. And so the next file is .bash profile. So this is going to run in every bash shell as well, but only for the ones where I start a prompt, right? So if I make a new bash window, this has a prompt, right? As opposed to if I say like, let's say I say echo the string echo foo, right? Then I pipe that to bash. This is actually telling bash to run this code as bash, which causes it to echo foo, right? It's a little meta, but you could understand that if I said like echo the string ls-la, my home directory, how about just ls, my home directory, pipe that to bash, it's gonna ls my home directory, right? So you can basically run bash as a sub bash, right? So I'm in a bash with an interactive terminal, but I can start a new bash, which would have its own environment variables, which actually like inherit from this one. So if you're doing that, you're not actually running an interactive bash, it's a non-interactive bash, so it doesn't run your bash profile.
Why would you do that?
Because sometimes you want to run bash scripts. So if I run like, if I have a bash script, you know, these are actually bash scripts, right? So, but if I had a different bash script, like, let's make a bash script called lshomedir.sh, or actually it should be .bash, right? So in this script, it's just going to say ls my home directory, yeah? So now I can run this bash ls my home directory, right? This actually starts a new instance of bash, but without a prompt. So it's going to run my bashrc, but it's not going to run my bash profile. So this difference between having a bash with a prompt and not, it's not super important to understand. If it's not super clear, you're very rarely going to do it. But basically, the difference you want to remember is that this is for every single bash instance, and this is just for the ones where you have like a prompt and interactivity going on.
So a similar question is, it seems like you're talking about bash profile being important when you are doing scripting, but does that also mean anytime you are piping anything, bash
No.
profile is going to run?
No.
Or is it mainly
No.
when you are
I was
running
piping
a
to
script?
bash. I was piping to bash. That's what you should. It's not the pipe that's important. It's the pipe to bash that was important.
So piping, so either when you're running a file,
Yeah.
an SH file, if you're running an SH file, then you're going to be doing bash profile.
I think if you run it with bash, I think that's true. Let's find out. Well, let's not find out.
It's like bin bash.
Yeah, but it's really not super important. Just make sure you put. Honestly, you could put everything in bashrc and you'd probably be fine. But this separation, there's more to read about. I don't know how to give a better explanation than the one I just did. The fact that you have interactive and non-interactive instances of bash, there's probably some good stuff to read about. If you find something, I'll put it in the terminal basics thing. But
So the things you chose to put in bash profile, is it
yeah, let's look at it.
potentially going to look like?
Yeah, let's go on it. So this really, I put this here because it wasn't things were not working as I expected them to work. As I understand them, like I said, bashrc runs for everything. Bash profile runs for just interactive shells. But that's actually all dictated in this global etc bash rc file. So if we look at that, this runs for everybody. What is this thing? Terminal program. Oh, interesting. So that's actually not what I was expecting. I don't know. the last time I really dove all into this stuff, it was on Ubuntu and not on OS X, and I haven't played with it, so it's probably a little different on OS X. But I put this here because bashrc was being executed, but excuse me, bash profile was being executed, but not bashrc. So what this line says is, if you have a bashrc, source that. So I have a little bit of research to do here. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure what exactly is going on in terms of why bash profile is being executed, but bashrc wasn't. So I put this here to fix that. So every time something sources your bash profile, it's also going to source your bashrc. That's what this is here for. So that's contradictory to what I just said, and I actually don't know what the right answer is. So I'll try to look that up and add that to the terminal basics. But basically, the only thing you need to take away from this is that these are initialization configuration files that set up your terminal, right? And some amount of bash profile and bashrc is going to be executed every time you start a new terminal, and that's where we're setting our aliases and setting what our prompt looks like. So the file I showed you before is being run from here, and then this is setting a bunch of bash configuration stuff.
I found out that OS X apparently always runs a login shell, so that's probably why that happens. It always is running the bash profile.
Okay.
It's always a login shell on
Okay,
OS X.
great. So then that's probably why I have to load this bashrc. So on OS X, we could probably just put everything in bash profile and we'd be fine in all cases. Yeah.
Oh, my ZSH, is that a shell on top of bash? Or?
No, ZSH is a different shell, alternate to bash. Oh my ZSH, I'm not sure, but I think that's just a plugin for ZSH that brings extra stuff. And I don't use ZSH or know anything about it. And I recommend that you learn bash. Before you can switch to ZSH, that's fine. But I mean, it's like building a kit car before you've ever driven a car. You know what I mean? Like learn the standard before you start putting tiny wheels on it or something. Okay, so I don't remember what these do, but I turned them on for some reason. We can look them up. What is bash meta flag? Well, that wasn't helpful. Yeah, in the interest of time, I don't want to go through all these. You can Google them. I don't remember what they do, but I liked when I researched them. I turned them on for my shell, and I liked it, so that's why I put them here. I think it has to do with the fact that in my terminal, I've configured this ability to like hold option left and right to jump from word to word. There's another key for this, but I don't remember what it is. But I like to be able to, like, you know, if I'm saying like get check out thing, and then I spell it wrong, I can just like option left and go there. There's another control key for that, but this is probably, I think that's what the meta key is the option key, but I don't remember. CLI color, this tells, this is an environment variable that a lot of programs will look at to determine whether or not they should print their output with color or not, which is a bunch of extra characters. So I turn that on so that like ls will by default show me different colors. Here I don't have any, but here you go. You know, directories are a different color than files. This is another thing that turns on colors. This I like because it will keep your history, but if I have duplicates, it doesn't. All right, well, it should have ignored dupes. That's what I thought that was doing. History control. Is my history control set to this? Yep. ls, 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 ls. Yeah, okay. So it's ignoring dupes, I guess. So everyone knows what history is? So I guess I could have covered that, right? Every time you type a command in bash, it gets put into, at some point, it depends on how your bash is configured. It's either when you close your shell or live at the time. There's a file called bash_history somewhere. Oh yeah. How about tail bash history in your home directory? There's a bash history. and it stores the previous commands that you've run. So you could just type history and it'll output all the commands you've ever run. I've got 1600 in my history, but you could do history, pipe, grep, I don't know, CD. And now that's all my CD commands or all my get commands, right? So you can grep through your history there. This configures how big your history is. I like to keep a really big history. And this tells it to ignore duplicates.
With history, are you able to do the history for just one particular project, or is it your entire?
It's just your entire history. It has nothing to do with a project, which would be a directory, but it has nothing to do with what directory you're in. It's global. So for example, you type some secure information into the shell at some point, right? Like if I were to just echo my password, which is not my password, I swear, but now this is in my history, right? So if I close this shell and open a new shell and do history pipe tail 10 or something, I think echo my password is now actually in this text file in my home directory, which is not a great idea, right? So if you're ever putting insecure information in the shell in part of a command, you might want to go purge that from your history, because somebody who's being nefarious on your laptop at some point would definitely search through your history and see if there's anything juicy in there.
These different things you're setting, you're adding to this file, and it's not like you turn on that file, they're already there.
Well, you can't turn on a file.
No, I mean, you go into the file and then you're adding these sort of variables like export, you're exporting.
This is a script, just like a Node script is a programming language, right?
Is there documentation, or is there a place that you can go to see all of these things?
Yeah, like bash shopt, sh-opt. So this is documentation for this sh options command, and there's all kinds of stuff. So what was one of those we were looking at? What does -s do? -s, enable, okay? And then we enabled command history, which says, if set bash attempts to save all lines in multiple line command in a history entity, it allows easy re-editing of multi-line commands. So this has something to do with maybe if you had a multi-line command, I think that's what it means, is that it's going to store multiple lines of that command. That's probably an option I turned on because the default was worse. I don't really know. It was like years and years ago that I turned all this stuff on, and I just put it in here because I knew it was what I liked in my shell. I could probably, or someone should, I would love if someone would if someone was going to research these things and figure out what they were doing, we could put some comments in here and document all this stuff. That would be great. I don't know what this does. Lit hist. Yeah, so something different. I don't know what that is. Command hist. Oh, and the command hist is, so like, this sounds like the exact same thing that I had before. What is hist append? Okay, so this is, I guess the default is a new shell will overwrite the history of another shell, so this appends. So I'll keep my history. I like to keep my history because I often forget useful commands. Now there's this bind thing. We got to look that up too. What's up? Oh, I can, yeah, I usually find that if you Google for something, the question was, why don't I look this up in the man pages? Is because if I Google for stuff, I'll end up finding the man page. So I feel like if I Google, I'm searching the man pages too. But I've sometimes man pages are just, they don't always have a clear and concise answer. So a Stack Overflow question and answer might be more clear, or a blog post about it might be more clear. So at this point, I just Google everything. So this is ignoring case and match hidden files. So tab complete hidden files. So if I wanted to, you know, this used to not work, I guess, without this tab completing dot files. So anyway, these are all just little niceties I've added over the years to my bash config. This npm wanted it at some point to fix some bug at some point, so I threw it in here. It probably has to do with npm installing a package that needs to be compiled by something. Or maybe actually probably has something to do with X11, which is like X11 is a different way of rendering windows, like a window, like OS X provides this interface for this desktop interface for having windows and folders and all the stuff that's rendered on the screen, right? X11 is an old Unix package for doing the same thing, for spawning a window or a box with windows in it that you can like have a desktop on and stuff like that. Like a desktop, a modern desktop, X11 implements that, or at least is a layer, a foundational layer to implement that. And so it's actually something you can execute alongside OS X to launch programs that were written for X11 on Unix systems. So like, it's probably something you'll never do, but X11 is just a different way. So there's actually a lot of open source libraries that are like, okay, we wrote this, or not even open source, but like a lot of desktop applications were written for X11, and people have done the work to make that executable on the Mac OS. So you can spawn X11 windows. I've probably installed a node package that did that, and then it wanted to know where my X11 stuff was. These are options for the get prompt. So get prompt will show dirty state or show untracked files. That's an option for this part of my prompt that shows this stuff. I think it shows extra little symbols, which honestly I've never gotten into the habit of reading. I always just do get status. This is loading the bash completion if it exists. That honestly should just be down in this thing here. I should have moved it down here. It's the same thing that I'm doing down here, where I've got this array of scripts that are just like this script. They configure your shell, but we're loading them from here so that we can have bash completion, right? So like, I don't know why I left the Docker one in here. No, I don't know if anyone's using Docker, but like normally, like if you try to tab complete, it just tab completes files. But if there is a bash completion setup, so like this Docker command, it's actually if I double tab, it'll complete the options for the script itself. Same thing with get. These are all the get commands. So we've got get branch, get RM, right? So now I have now it's easier for me to discover what my different get configs are, right? Or get options are, right? Because I sourced this get completion file. It told the current shell that I'm in, every time you launch a new shell, it runs that script, which tells the shell, if anyone hits tab for the get command, do this instead of just tab completing file. This is a for loop that goes through all of these files and checks to see if they exist, and if they do, then it sources them. So if you don't have them installed, it should just ignore them. And then this is about the prompt. This is how I have set up my prompt. I chose to use a prompt color variable so that it was easier to figure out how to change this. So if I change my prompt color to 33 or 32, it changes my prompt color.
So those are brew installed SH files that have configuration?
Yeah, they all get put in the wherever brew is installed. So brew prefix most of the time is user local, but you can put it anywhere. So I use this. So this is another thing that's a bash thing, right? So if I echo this, right, it actually sends the expansion of this. This is like a sub command, right? So I can say anything in here. And it's going to send the output of this command. It's going to take that output and put it in that string, and then that gets sent. So it is actually a subshell, right? So I can say echo the string ls my home directory pipe word count -l space files in my home dir, right? So there are 15 files in my home directory. Does that make sense? That command there. So this $paren n paren will run this first, take its output and put it in this string, and then pass that to echo. So I'm using that here to say whatever the brew, wherever brew has its stuff, /etc/bash completion.d. So if I had my brew installed somewhere else, it would go there, right? So yeah.
And then source takes that.
So source just means go execute that file. Cool. That's so then the other stuff that's in here is git config stuff. You want to go over that? Okay, great. Let's go to the any more questions about bash related things? Sweet. Okay. Mocha before and after each. I should have done save dev, but this is not a real application. Okay, and I'll make some tests. Okay. Oh, I need oh, thanks. Okay, so we have this failing test. Yeah? Everybody follow that? I went pretty quick. Okay, so we've got this test. What's a good example for this? So let's say we're going to test something like this. Okay, so we're gonna test this human thing, and then we're also gonna test get name, and we'll say it should return the name. So here, if we did this normally, we'd say yeah. So it's pretty important that everybody understand what's going on here, right? So I've created a human constructor, and then I have a function that just returns whatever name you gave it when you created it. And so I'm testing that here, right? So one of the example cases for before each is if we had multiple tests here. We could do something like this, where we'd say, so instead, we could basically dry up this duplication. Like if these two tests were different, but they had the same setup code, and maybe it's a little bit more complicated than this one liner, right? We can move this setup code to a before each, and then we just have to put this out here. And now both of these tests, this function is going to run before each of these tests, and it's going to reinstantiate this object, and it's going to share that code essentially in front of each of these tests. Yeah.
that's just a mocha or chai thing where you could really just wrap it in a function that if both of those hits are inside of a function that just define Jared. And that would work.
I mean, they are inside of this function, right? But we have to let mocha decide when things run, right? Mocha is the test runner. So we're telling mocha, this is a test and this is a test. And before these two tests, before each of them, run this code. Now, what mocha's not doing in here is this lexical inheritance of this variable, right? This is a function. It has its own scope. Each of these three functions here inherit from that scope, and they inherit the Jared variable. So all three of these functions, all four really, the wrapping one included, share the same variable Jared, right? And let's put a log here. And then here we'll say test A, test B, and you'll see we got a before each for test A and a before each for test B. So the human is being reinitialized, and we can assert that by changing my name to Steve, and it still works because both test A and test B have a new instance of the Jared construction. Yeah. So that's one example of using before each. It's a way to dry up initialization code for your tests, right? One way you might do that is by using a context. Now, context is an alias for describe. It's the exact same thing. It's meant for developers to understand the difference between this block is for describing a specific thing, and this is for describing what the world is like, right? So when named Jared would be a context versus when named, you know, Laura or whatever. Now I could have these two different contexts. So I'll put a before each here. That's now we'll use a generic variable now. And so now I can have a test in here that says, hold on, I want to say I'm describing get name. And now I can say it should return Jared. And this should return So now it's not necessarily about drying up duplicate code. It's about structuring our test code in such a way that our setup code is different from our test code, right? This sets up what the world is like, and this describes what the world is like, right? So a human, when named Jared, the getName function should return Jared, right? So let's look at these tests. And we say human, when named Jared, getName should return Jared. When named Laura, getName should return Laura, right? So it kind of reads a little bit nicer than if we had just smashed it all together. We wouldn't have had these nice little context descriptions, right? So you might write these tests. Let's say you're testing a web app that you've written, or you're testing, let's say you're testing that to-do list that most of you worked on, right? You could say describe to-do list, context, when my list is empty, describe get or describe list should return an empty list. When my to-do list has 5 entries, describe list should return 5 things, right? So you have this concept of like what I'm testing and what is the state of the world when I'm testing it. And those two things could yield different results, right? Because the list command for my to-do list should do a different thing when my list is empty than when it has stuff on it, right? So that's one way you can use before each and after each. After each I rarely have to use it, but it would be for like some sort of teardown or some sort of cleanup. right? Let's say our test had side effects and we want to clean up those side effects so that they don't bleed over into another test. We might have to do that in an after each. Is that good? All right. Cool. So this one was just about, so I'm going to touch A and B JS. Yeah? Everybody understand this now? Boom, 2 files, A and B. Okay. Where am I? Okay, so if A requires B and then yeah, cool. Okay, and then B is going to be like module cool. So A requires B, calls the function that it exports, and then that function from b.js just logs it, yeah? So if I do node a.js, I get an error. Cannot find, oh yeah, it's not B, it's /B. There we go. So A successfully required B, got a function from its exports and called it. And I think this question was about like, how would I test that in the node REPL? And the answer is you can just do the exact same thing. You can just require /B, which gives you that function. And then you can just call it. Yeah?
Yeah. So I get it. Like when you're
Yeah. And bash is different, right? So, but you can't, for example, just do like this, right? There's no, and send it information or anything like that. That doesn't work. So this was to clarify some confusion someone had about the difference between calling a node script from bash versus trying to require and call some code in the node REPL. So if that was clear to you, then great. If not, I can take questions about it. Was that weird?
yeah.
Okay. All I'm trying to illustrate is that if I'm writing something like this where I'm requiring this file and I want to test it out outside of the context of this file, you can just go into the node REPL, require this file, and just run it manually. That's all I wanted to show. That's it. Just as a way of testing the things that you're exporting out of context. But if you haven't had a need to do that, then don't worry about it. Cool. Someone wanted to talk about reduce. Who wanted to talk about reduce? Okay. Well, we'll go to the next one then. Well, sure, but I don't know what the confusion around reduce is, so. And we've talked about it before. I know I have a video recorded on reduce, and there's lots and lots of really good documentation about it, so unless anyone has a specific question. Cool. Someone who I also think is not here asked what an application interface is, or what an API is. Does anybody know what an API is? Sure, that's one way to do it, right? So an API might refer to like the GitHub API, right? The GitHub API is an HTTP, probably RESTful, maybe not, but it's definitely an HTTP API, right? And but API is more of a general term that to me just means like what's the interface, right? Like this TV has a physical API. It's got a button that's really hard to find in the middle down here. It's got, or this is an API, right? What button do I press to, I'm sorry, for people in the video, I'm holding up a TV remote control. This is an API, right? This is an interface for this TV as an application, right? So the fact that the one button is at the top versus at the bottom, that's an API design decision. In the same way that an HTTP API, like the GitHub API, they decided, you know, get a GET request to /users, or, you know, /API v2 /users is going to return JSON, and that and they could have decided that it was, you know, get -users, right? That was a design decision they could have made, they had control over. And so when they designed their application interface, they went with this and not this. And so what the API is, the documentation for the GitHub API, like, is the description of that application interface, right? Now that's true for this HTTP interface, but it's also just true for any code that we write, right? So I used this test earlier, I used this example earlier. This is a little bit of an API, right? I'm designing a human constructor here, and the fact that it takes a name and has a getName function, I decided that interface. I decided how this thing worked. That interface is, you could call an API. The API to this human library that I'm pretending to make here has an interface that I have to read the docs to learn about, right? Mocha has an interface that we have to learn about to use it the way it was intended, right? So that's a general use of the word API, but so you might hear that when someone says, like, you know, we're making this library together, we should change our API to support this, or we should change the interface to our tool to work this way or work this other way, right? So it just means, like, you know, how you interact with the thing, the details of that is an API, is an application interface. Yeah.
So usually when you hear the term API, it's referring to something like Google Maps API or Twitter API to do something. Are all of the APIs that you're going to be working with in that fashion? Like, if you're trying to add Google Maps to your website or your app, it seems like all of them are in some kind of JSON format that you have to learn how to traverse. Is there ever an instance where it's not going to be JSON and it's a different format, or is it usually just JSON these two learn?
I mean, JSON is just more popular than the other serialization formats that we've had before. The previous most popular one, in my opinion, was XML, right? And HTML is like a subset of XML, or maybe a superset, actually, of XML. But that's another way of taking information and serializing it into a string, right? JSON just happens to be a lot simpler, and so it's gotten more popular, and it's easier to use, in my opinion, than XML. So that's just a trend of the times. If someone invents a serialization format, excuse me, that's easier to use than JSON, we'll probably all switch to that. You know what I mean? So it's just but the APIs you're talking about, when you said, like, usually when people say API, they mean like a web API. That's just because we live in the web world. If we were working at Amazon and we weren't web developers and we were working on, like, spawning virtual machines, right? We'd talk about APIs more commonly in a different thing, right? We'd talk about, like, a command line API or something like that, right? So it's really just like, what buttons do I press? What buttons do I have? What happens when I press them? Where do I send information? How do I get it? That whole interface, however you interact with something, that wall that separates you and the thing and the buttons on that wall, that's the interface. Cool. All right. One more question.
You said RESTful, that's still a little more clear on what RESTful versus not RESTful.
Sure. So just like this, right? I can create an API where I get users all kinds of ways that I want. Right? I can make it, I could be silly and make it so when you post to users, you get all the users, right? HTTP itself doesn't care how you format your paths of your URL, and it cares a lot about the methods that you use, get versus post specifically, but it doesn't care where and it doesn't even have a concept of resources, right? So so when we made web apps for a long time, people would just, let's say we're making a calendar web app, right? So we'd say, you know, calendar slash, you know, events. And then we'd make like a new event resource, right? We would just make shit up for whatever it is we needed, right? If we needed to delete an event, we'd go, okay, well, if you do a post to delete event and you pass it event ID, you know, equals whatever the ID is, right? I could make a web app that works this way, and there's nothing guiding me to one way or the other, right? So what we had for a long time was just a million web apps where their API was incredibly different, non-intuitive, you couldn't assume anything, and you just had to go read the docs and kind of do everything as a one-off. So RESTful routing was created to provide structure to this unstructured world of exposing what are called resources, right? So if I'm talking about, if I'm making a website for a library, I'm going to have a resource off my API called books, and this represents a resource. And so the resources have several main interactions that we need to do to be able to have full control or to have management over that resource, right? We need to be able to get, so books is a plural resource, right? So I need to be able to get all of them. That's the index route. I need to be able to create one. I need to be able to read one. I need to be able to update one and delete one, which is create, read, update, and delete is CRUD. You might have heard that initialism or that acronym. RESTful routing uses CRUD in that these are the 4 basic operations you need to manage a resource, right? You can be able to create one, read one, update one, and delete one. But then also you need to be able to get a list of all of them, right? And there's a couple of extra pages that RESTful puts in here, but RESTful routing defines where you put these routes. So this will be the index route. The create route is going to be a post to /API books. The read is going to be a get to /API books /book ID, right? And the update is going to be a put to this, and a delete is going to be a delete to this. So and there's a couple other routes in there that are like this is where you actually do the update, but what if I want a form that displays the book to me in an easily editable way? So I'll do the, what do they call this route? I don't remember, but it's the sister route to this, which is /edit. Oh, this is the edit route, right? So if I want to be presented with a page that lets me edit the book, I have this. And if I want to be presented with a page that lets me create a new book, this is just a form, right? So it dictates what these, no, don't take a screenshot of this, just Google RESTful routing. There's a million good charts for describing how this pattern should be implemented. And this is just for a plural resource.
So concise.
Really quick question.
Yeah.
Are those called API endpoints?
Sure, yeah.
Is that the same as a route? Is an API endpoint?
Yeah. Yep. So if we go create an Express app and we define all these routes and it does the right thing to the database, we've basically created a bookstore API that allows us to interface with this resource of a pile of books and creating one and reading one and deleting one and updating one, right? So this gives some structure to APIs that make them hopefully, and we haven't really gotten there yet, where you don't need to write your own library to consume your API. You could go consume a general RESTful API library that would make all these pattern assumptions. So if I wanted to use GitHub's API, I wouldn't have to use any special GitHub software. I could just use the RESTful API node module, for example, and then I would point it at a RESTful route and it would just follow the right patterns and everything would just work. It didn't actually turn out that way. It's not quite that nice. We still end up using libraries specific for the API in languages. So there's a GitHub library for consuming the GitHub API. So RESTful routing has only helped us make intelligent assumptions about where endpoints should be for certain operations, but it's not perfect yet. We don't have really good consistency across APIs yet, but this is an effort to get there. And that's it on RESTful APIs. And we're out of time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.